Coming to ABC and Hulu.
Amanda Riley was a mother, wife,
speaker at her church.
And then
she got diagnosed with cancer.
A beloved young Christian woman fighting a battle undeserved.
We thought she was God's gift, but she was a liar.
Why would somebody fake cancer?
From the #1 smash hit podcast.
It was only a matter of time until Amanda's whole world came tumbling down.
You're not going to believe this. Scamanda. New episodes Thursday nights on ABC and stream on Hulu.
We are
Cultivate.
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 Cultivate. We are Cultivate.
Hello and welcome to Ye Olde Crime, where we discuss the funny, strange, and obscure crimes of yesteryear. I'm your host, Lindsay Valenti, and with me is my sister and co-host, Maddie Stankel.
Hello.
Well, hello there.
Hey there, hi there. On the coldest
hi there,
day.
Hello there. Right? Our listeners won't know this, but it has been a hot second since Maddie and I have recorded together. 2-3 weeks, something like that.
Yeah. We've seen each other in person twice, but it's felt really strange. Like my Sundays and Mondays were a little sad. I was kind of waiting for this call.
So you will have noticed, if you've been listening this year, that all of January was guest episodes where I had somebody on the show. And so this is the first one we've been recording, quote unquote, in person in some time. So at the time we are recording this, it is like 2 or 3 weeks in the past by the time this comes out. So things might have changed. Most notable historic event is that TikTok went down today. So if that gives you any context as to when we're recording.
I was really sad. I got the little notification the day before, and then when it went out, I just deleted it because I was like, I don't have anything that would make me want to keep the app for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And I don't want my sticky finger to constantly try to open it up and then get in trouble somehow.
I just took it off of my home screen, so it's out of sight, out of mind. On that note, should we segue into this week's topic?
I think we should.
So this week we will be discussing Old Newgate Prison.
Oh, Old Newgate. Something was old enough to be new.
I guarantee you it is not what you think. So information was pulled from the following sources: 2023 Yankee Institute article by Andrew Fowler, 2021 Connecticut History Post by Greg Mangan, 2018 Revolutionary War Journal article by Harry Chenowolf, 1828 The Litchfield County Post article, Atlas Obscura, Colebrook Historical Society post by Bob Grigg, Connecticut's official state website, Damned Connecticut post by Ray Bendici, one of those, Mainly Museums post by Sam Dinney, Make a Day of It New England article, Old Newgate Prison and Copper Mine documentary, Old Newgate Prison and Copper Mine East Granby page, Scribd listing by Sierra Michelle Aguilar, and Wikipedia.
It already, just in those alone, I wasn't expecting it to be in the United States. So it's like, oh, okay. The title makes a little more sense now.
Yep. And thank you so much to Carrie Ann for her research assistance with this episode. And links to all of these articles will be included in the show notes. We wouldn't be here without support from listeners like you. If you're interested in supporting us financially, you can leave a one-time or monthly donation over on Buy Me a Coffee or our Venmo page. Links are in the show notes. And we make a point of reaching out to send you a thank you note and stickers to show our appreciation.
Want to show your support in a more concrete way? Pick up some Yield Crime merch over at our TeePublic shop. We shout out whenever there is a sale each month, and we work to make sure we're creating new designs and changing it up whenever possible. And hey, thanks for listening.
Not to be confused with the prison of a similar name in jolly old England, today's location, the old Newgate Prison and Copper Mine, was the first official prison in the state of Connecticut and home to Loyalists during the American Revolutionary War.
Oh, okay. So the most treasonous of peoples at that time.
Yep. So let's get into it. Back in 1705, copper was discovered on the Simsby side of Talcott Mountain. Located 20 miles north of Hartford, this discovery launched the construction of a copper mine in 1707, making it the first chartered copper mine in North America.
Ooh.
Fancy. 2 years later, in 1709, the Woodbridge Company was started by 3 men of the cloth, John Woodbridge, Timothy Woodbridge Jr., and Dudley Woodbridge.
Ah.
The Woodbridge Company extracted the ore, then refined and cast it into bars. The owners invited the residents of Simsbury to join in the venture, and 64 people agreed to invest time and money into the company in order to become shareholders.
Kind of like Hy-Vee grocery store. You're an investor as well as an employee.
Yes.
That has to be like an incredible once-in-a-lifetime deal back then. Because how often were like the common folk ever able to involve themselves at all? Ever.
Anything. Portions of the mine were even owned by wealthy stakeholders like Massachusetts Governor Jonathan Belcher, although others were located in Massachusetts and throughout Connecticut. Excavations took place on the summit, and a vertical shaft was dug almost 70 feet down.
Oh, no. Absolutely not. Even back then, absolutely not.
Yeah, no thanks. From here, horizontal tunnels were dug, some as far as 1,100 feet away from the ladder.
No. Nope.
From your one way out.
Nope. Nope, nope, nope.
Ore would be collected and transported back to the surface in buckets. The actual mining was primarily performed by Germans, who received little to no compensation.
Huh. You know, it's really kind of rare that you hear Germans being treated poorly in the New World. Like, you knew that it happened, but there's not a lot of like documentation of what kind of prejudice it was. So it's interesting that,
at least not in like the time period that we discuss. Like maybe later in the 1900s, but yeah, not like right now.
So mining is the thing, I guess, for Germans. Interesting.
Yep. Revenues generated by the mine would go on to pay for town expenses and be used to hire a schoolmaster. So there you go.
Nice.
Education.
Very progressive. Very progressive.
At a glance, it appeared to be a profitable venture. However, given that the mine was built in the early 1700s, meant it was considered the property of Britain, thus forcing the owners to follow imperial rules and regulations.
Uh-oh, let me guess. That's not super fun or profitable for the people.
No. These included sending poor quality copper overseas for it to be smelted, as the process was still in its infancy here in North America. Having to ship lesser quality copper across the ocean put a considerable dent in the mine's profits.
Yeah, I bet.
So by the time 1773 rolled around, the deposits of copper ore were all but depleted, tanking the mine's profits.
Just in time for war.
In an effort to continue to make use of the land, the Connecticut General Assembly decided that the Simsbury Mines may get a new life as a prison.
Creepy. Great.
At this time in history, the public had had enough of corporal punishments, such as whipping, cropping people's ears, which I didn't realize was a thing.
Oh my. In public, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Ugh.
Or branding criminals with hot irons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would get sick of seeing those too, guys.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you there.
Instead, they wished for reform, and that's what the colony of Connecticut set out to do.
Hmm.
In May of 1773, Captain Jonathan Humphrey, Colonel William Pitkin, and Erastus Wolcott toured the mines, noting that it had, I put two shafts, one that was 25 feet deep with a ladder attached to it, and another that was 67 feet deep that had been used during the extraction of the copper ore.
Okay.
The men concluded that by carving out a 16-foot lodging room near the first shaft with the built-in ladder, they could turn the mine into a formidable prison. So they would have like a room next to
One of the little like entrances are.
yes.
That would be horrific. I'd be like, so about corporal punishment.
Can I take
Can
the
I
ear
just
cropping, please?
Yeah, can someone just crop my ears instead, please?
And let me go. The colonial legislature approached John Viets, the owner of the land on which the mine was located, on December 2nd, 1773. John, who lived across the street at a tavern that he ran, was informed that he would be a great prison keeper. And he agreed.
Is that like a you have a face for radio kind of compliment?
Maybe they were like, you're so good at peopling, running your own tavern.
While also being like kind of scary.
We think you've got this. You've got the makings of a great prison keeper. To that end, later that month, the mine's lease was purchased to the tune of $375 or $13,800 today.
That would be a lot for like a state or a local institution.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
So the colony of Connecticut purchased the mine's lease from John so that they could use it as a prison. And it was rebranded as Newgate, which marketed itself as an inescapable prison.
Horrific. Inescapable. They
Yeah.
just throw you in a bunch of holes.
Yep. After installing an iron gate near the 25-foot shaft, they admitted their first prisoner, a man named John Hinson, who was sentenced to 10 years in prison for burglary on December 22nd, 1773. Now, John wasn't your average burglar.
Was he a cat burglar?
No. Well, maybe, kinda, yeah.
Mm.
So, by the time he'd ended up at Newgate, he'd been held at one time or another in around 6 different county jails for a number of offenses, such as selling stolen goods and being an imposter at church fairs, which God don't like that.
Nope.
Known for his silver tongue, John was just as good at talking his way out of trouble as he was getting into it.
Aren't we all?
The judge who sentenced him to Newgate warned keeper John Viet, quote, "He is sly, ornery, and cunning as a viper. If there is any way of breaking out of Simsbury jail, Hinson will find it," end quote.
Dang. So he's slippery. You better watch him.
Claims of it being inescapable were quickly thwarted when 20-year-old John managed to escape just 18 days into his confinement, thanks to, quote, "evil-minded persons from without," end quote, according to prison keeper John.
So because he had help.
Yes.
He had help, so he got out.
The night of his escape, a winter storm hit the area, covering
Mhm.
everything in a layer of wet, heavy snow that was about 2 feet deep.
Okay.
And with his tavern empty of patrons and the chances of any showing up being slim to none, Keeper John decided to spend the evening at the guardhouse of the prison. So he was like, I'll just hang out here.
Yeah. Probably warmer.
Yep. To combat his boredom, John would call down the shaft to the prisoner to see if the conditions in the mine were any better than the ones above ground. Which,
That's so fucking mean. That's so rude.
hey, are you sitting there in 2 feet of snow? No, but it's still wet and cold down there? Oh, sucks to be you.
Mm-hmm. I'm just drying my socks off by the stove up here. It's so hot.
Mm-hmm. Around midnight, Keeper John began to hear creaking noises in the yard. The snow was falling so fast and thick that he couldn't see further than 6 feet in front of him, but several tree branches had gotten so heavy with snow that they'd fallen off the trees, landing in the
Mhm.
yard.
Yeah, that's the reason.
After confirming that nothing untoward was afoot, John returned to the guardhouse and once more called out to John in the mine. After he received no response, Keeper John grabbed a club and lantern and entered the mine. After scouring every inch of the mine, he discovered that John had, in fact, managed to escape.
Oh man.
It's believed that his lover snuck onto the property and lowered a 100-foot coil of rope down the larger shaft that hadn't been covered by a gate. Because remember, there's 2 shafts.
Yep.
And they used that to pull him up to freedom. His mistress had hiked over the snowy hills in order to assist in his escape. In fact, several successful escapes would be made over the years, as well as many failed ones that ranged from clever to downright violent.
Uh-oh.
In April of 1774, a trio who had been imprisoned in February escaped, and so 2 months later, and one inmate lasted only 4 days in the jail.
Uh-oh.
Now, there were several reasons as to why you may be imprisoned at Newgate, including arson, attempted murder, attempted or realized sexual assault, burglary, counterfeiting, court-martial, which we'll get back to, forgery, high crimes and misdemeanors, horse stealing, which there was a large number of horse stealers that were
I
arrested.
bet. I mean, it's probably the equivalent of carjacking.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Illicit trade, manslaughter, and being a Tory.
So this was kind of a intensive prison unit.
Mm-hmm. In an effort to prevent this embarrassing type of breach to happen again, various improvements were made on the property to prevent the thieves, counterfeiters, and murderers that were being held there from escaping.
Right.
So now 2 guards would be stationed to watch the shafts at night, and guards were doubled and even quadrupled, and hourly checks would be made.
Sure. Right.
Additionally, half-ton stones would go on to be cemented over the top of the well shaft until they almost covered the iron grating, leaving just a slit for ventilation.
That's horrific. Like almost suffocating them.
Yeah. And given that the property had no enclosing wall at the time it was opened, prisoners were forced to stay in the mine for 12 hours a day in total darkness from 4 p.m. to 4 a.m., with the only way out being the mine shaft, which they had to climb with shackles around their wrists and ankles. Those imprisoned there were given hay to sleep on as they endured the wet, cold, and inhumane conditions, not to mention the dark. And apparently they had bunk beds down there. I can only imagine one wouldn't be better than the other because one, you're going to be closer to the ground where it's wet and
Colder.
gross. And if you're on the top one, you're the one that's getting dripped on all night.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, neither option is good.
Yep. You're still cold.
They would also be anchored to a stone ledge in the mine to prevent escape attempts.
Jeez.
The interior of the mine would stay at a steady temperature of 52 degrees, or 11 degrees Celsius.
Oh, man. Yeah, you'd always be sick. Your immune
Mm-hmm.
system would always be high.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh.
They would be given half-edible food and lashings for showing disobedience.
Mm.
In his famous 1844 account, Newgate of Connecticut, A History of the Prison, Richard Phelps notes of the mine, quote, "The passage down the shaft into the caverns is upon a ladder fastened upon one side and resting on the bottom. At the foot of this passage commences a gradual descent for a considerable distance, all around being solid mass rock or ore. The passages extend many rods in different directions, some of them even leading under the cellars of the dwellings in the neighborhood. In two of the passages are wells of deep water, one of which measures 80 feet. They serve for a free circulation of air to the inmates of this gloomy place, and were sometimes used for shafts through which to lift the ore when the business was carried on. On the sides and in the niches of the cavern, platforms were built of boards for the prisoners on which straw was placed for their beds. The horrid gloom of this dungeon can be realized only by those who pass among its solitary windings. The dripping water trickling like tears from its sides, the unearthly echoes responding to the voice, all conspire to strike the beholder aghast with amazement and horror." End quote.
Yeah, I don't know how you would just survive, how you would come back as a person
Yep,
and what just enduring any amount of time in there.
yep. Between 1773 and 1775, almost every prisoner who had ever been put there managed to escape. Even so, the overseers continued to claim that it was a secure facility. One man was able to escape by swapping out his body with that of a corpse, while others would attempt to fight their way out. And if they were lucky, they could bribe their way to freedom. And then, on December 11th, 1775, the Committee of Safety at Simsbury received the following missive. Quote, "Gentlemen, the prisoners which will be delivered you with this, having been tried by a court-martial and deemed to be such flagrant and atrocious villains that they cannot by any means be set at large or confined in any place near this camp, were sentenced to be sent to Simsbury in Connecticut. You will therefore be pleased to have them secured in your jail, so that they cannot possibly make their escape. George Washington." End quote.
Not old George.
Throughout the Revolutionary War, George Washington had court-martialed soldiers sent there, Tories, as well as loyalists who fought against gaining independence.
Mm.
The difference was that instead of being treated as prisoners of war, those loyal to the crown were either sentenced to death, whipping, or imprisonment. And since they were not prisoners of war, they couldn't receive pardons or be exchanged and released.
Ooh. Ooh, dirty.
Dirty pool.
Mm-hmm.
The Council of Safety was right to fear that the holding of Tories in the prison would cause tensions.
Mm-hmm.
And historians have theorized that the ill treatment they received at the prison may be the cause of the ill treatment that many American prisoners faced on British prison ships stationed outside New York City later on in the war.
Mm. Interesting.
Because Tories did escape, so they're going to
Yeah.
report back, this is the kind of shit that we dealt with.
Yeah. This is what happened to us.
Yeah.
So of course they're gonna mimic it.
For example, in 1776, the first mass prison break was attempted, with the idea being that the prisoners could burn their way out.
Oh no.
See, back when it was still a mine, a drainage channel had been blasted from the lowest floor level all the way to the outer slope of the hill. This channel was just large enough for a man to crawl through, but the problem was that the prison had blocked off the channel with a massive oak door that was studded with iron to prevent just this type of escape.
So he had to blow it up?
All the attempts that prisoners had made to chip away at the door or even bust it amounted to nothing, so a group decision was made to attempt to burn it down instead. With this thought in mind, over several weeks, the prisoners had been smuggling small amounts of kindling down into the mine until they had gathered enough to start a fairly large bonfire. The pile was pushed against the door, and with the use of a flint, the fire started. The fire was burning so well that the prisoners were confident that within the span of a couple hours, their freedom would be assured.
Yeah.
What they didn't plan on was the fact that the fumes from the fire had nowhere to go. Add to this their limited supply of oxygen in the mine, and I think you can see where this is going.
Smoke inhalation, suffocation, and death.
Once the men started to realize what was happening, they panicked and attempted to flee. But obviously, there was nowhere for them to go.
Right. And by that point, too, they'd be so incapacitated that they wouldn't be able to get out.
As a result, one by one, they were overcome by the fumes. The guards, alerted to the attempt when they saw the smoke, knew what they would be walking into. So, they waited until the fire had burned itself out. Then began the laborious process of carrying out the dead and unconscious prisoners. Those who had managed to survive were placed within a small holding area under the blockhouse, while the guards worked to plug up the drain with stone and mortar. Undeterred and pissed about the cramped quarters, the prisoners set fire to the timber ceiling of their cell. And in the chaos that ensued to put out the blaze, many of the prisoners were able to make their escape.
I just can't imagine the constant chaos and drama in this place. Like how anybody would ever be able to be there for a long period of time.
As the Revolutionary War continued, the number of prisoners and Tories that were sent to Newgate seemed to just keep growing. To accommodate the rising numbers, the blockhouse was quickly rebuilt and reinforced, and this time it included a whipping stall, a basement with separate dungeons, and double hatchways at the entrance to the main shaft. 30 criminals were then forced into the main shaft to the caverns, and this group would be the ones to take part in the most infamous prison break at Newgate. Since it was imperative that the prisoners be confined and stay that way, the number of guards was increased to number 24 privates under the direction of a corporal, sergeant, and lieutenant.
Dang. During wartime, that'd be a big sacrifice.
Privates carried loaded muskets with fixed bayonets with them at all times, and the officers were equipped with cutlasses and pistols.
Dang.
At this point, it was almost a 1-to-1 ratio of guards to prisoners. This caused the guards to relax a little bit, knowing that they weren't outnumbered. So they started to relax their harsh treatment of the prisoners and even allowed them to receive visitors. One such visitor was Abigail Young, who was the wife of Jonathan Young. She arrived late at night on May 18th, 1781, and begged to be allowed to spend just 1 hour with her husband. After she was carefully searched, she was escorted to the top of the shaft to be allowed entrance. What the guards were unaware of was that her visit had been carefully planned, as the majority of the prisoners were waiting on the ladder below, armed with stones or any pieces of metal that they had been able to sneak into the mine.
Oh my.
As soon as the hatch was unlocked to the shaft, The prisoners rushed out, quickly overpowering the officers and taking their weapons. The privates who were working quickly surrendered, and those who had been asleep at the time didn't have much choice in the matter.
Right.
During the scuffle, several of the convicts had become injured by their own comrades in the pitch black, but by the time midnight rolled around, 20 prisoners who were able to travel made their escape over the hill. So 10 of them weren't able to do it.
Okay.
Of the 20, these included 2 loyalists named Ebenezer Hathaway and Thomas Smith. In their wake, they left 6 privates who had been stabbed or shot, 1 dying officer named Gad Sheldon, and all the jailers locked in the dungeon. It wasn't until the morning that the breakout was discovered, and at that point, the bulk of the prisoners were long gone, with them being able to only recover a handful of the escapees. And I'm assuming most of those were the ones that had been injured.
Right? The ones that were slow to leave, couldn't leave.
Yep. Yeah. The Connecticut legislature was furious at the news, and an investigation was started immediately. The guards were forced to endure the brunt of the backlash, with Jacob Southwell, who had stayed out of the fray, being called, quote, a young man more fit to carry fish to market than to keep guard at Newgate, end quote. Fellow guard Nathan Phelps was referred to as, quote, a small lad just fit to drive a plow with a very gentle team, end quote.
What is with these nasty reads in the newspaper? My God.
I know.
These weak nerds.
Right. 1781 saw the erection of a picket fence around the property that was approximately 187 by 160 feet before it was later replaced by a wooden palisade several years later in 1790, tipped with spikes.
Ew.
Yeah, I don't like that. Following the conclusion of the war and the signing of the Paris Peace Treaty in September of 1783, in 1790, Newgate became the first state prison of the newly independent country of America.
Nice. That's a big deal.
It even had its own solitary confinement, which was
Oh,
a
boy.
hollowed-out cavern a few steps from the well.
That's where lots of people went crazy, I bet.
It's so safe, that close to water.
Mm-hmm.
Additionally, a 12-foot tall stone wall was built in 1802 to prevent the prisoners from escaping and fleeing into the woods that surrounded the property, which numbered almost 5 acres.
Nice.
Improvements continued to be made to the prison, such as the addition of a guardhouse over the laddered mine shaft. The 2-story building was made of 10-inch square timbers, primarily thanks to prison labor. And funnily enough, all of the men who worked on the guardhouse managed to escape before the roof was put on.
Convenient. Almost like they planned it.
Right. On the northern side of the prison yard, a nail and cooper's shop was constructed, and the south side was soon home to a wagon and machine shop, shoe shop, storeroom, kitchen, and chapel.
Nice.
A hospital and quarters for female convicts was also added to the property. So thankfully the women didn't have to go down in the mines.
Nice.
Prisoners would be brought topside at 4 a.m.
Topside?
Yep. And shackled before starting a long day of back-breaking work. The improvements to the property were done in a vain attempt to have the prisoners make commercial products that could be sold to offset the rising costs of running the prison,
Right.
such as nails, shoes, and other items.
Mm-hmm.
Those who hadn't learned a trade, such as shoemakers, coopers, blacksmiths, cooks, or wagon and basket makers, were required to dig through the stone in order to level the earth, or took part in the variety of improvements that were made on the property.
So you have to contribute some way.
Yes. Originally, prisoners mined copper, but it wasn't long before the officials at Newgate started to rethink putting dangerous digging tools in the hands of the prisoners.
What? What's wrong with that? Why would you worry about that?
Yeah, I read that they had once again reached out to some German miners and were like, hey, why don't you go down there with these prisoners, give them some digging tools, and see what happens? And then someone was like, you know what? That's probably not the best idea.
Yep, probably not
Maybe
the
we shouldn't do
best.
that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most famous tasks that unskilled prisoners were forced to perform was the operation of the treadmill. This long, flanged wheel had
Mm-hmm.
several paddle blades that up to 22 men would have to climb, almost like a set of stairs, to turn the wheel that ground grain.
Like a hamster wheel. Like a
Like a
really
giant,
horrific Jacob's Ladder, hamster wheel, Stairmaster nightmare situation.
yep, that.
Fun.
In 1806, another prison break involving 30 prisoners would start in the blacksmith and nail shop, ending with the death of fellow inmate Aaron Goomer.
Mm.
One of the last major escapes would take place in 1823, with over 100 prisoners escaping, only 2 of which were fatally shot by the guards.
Man. Still low.
Several years later, in 1824, a 4-story building was erected that included offices, a treadmill, mess hall, granary, and cells that could accommodate up to 50 prisoners. Prisoners were moved to a newly constructed 4-story cell block in order to meet the new prison reforms that were set up in the 19th century. They were like, it's probably not okay to be keeping them in the ground like this anymore.
Right. It's maybe just a little too cold.
To give you an idea of how quickly the prison had grown, on average, it could be filled with around 800 men.
Mm-hmm.
And by 1827, so this is 3 years after they just constructed the 4-story building,
Mm-hmm.
that number had swelled to 7,200.
Oh. Hmm.
Yeah. And even with these updates, Newgate would go on to be condemned.
Yeah. No, 1,000%. Yep.
It would remain a prison until 1827, at which time prisoners would be transferred to other more modern facilities in Wethersfield, such as the newly built Wethersfield State Prison. The night before the prisoners were set to be relocated, one prisoner named Abel Starkey, who still had to serve 17 years of his sentence, attempted a last valiant escape by climbing the well bucket rope that he had bribed the guard $50, or around $1,600 today, to leave
Jeez.
hanging down.
That's crazy.
During his ascent, the rope broke, or was more likely cut by a guard, causing Abel to fall to his death in the well below, where he was later found in 20 feet of water.
Gross.
Yeah. As noted in the June 12th, 1828 edition of the Litchfield County Post, on June 27th, 1827, the first 20 convicts were moved to the Connecticut State Prison, with 20 more joining them on August 14th. And then the rest were relocated on September 19th. Now, William Stewart, who had been imprisoned at Newgate for counterfeiting, described the dreary conditions of the mines in which the prisoners were held at night years later in 1854. Quote, armies of fleas, lice, and bedbugs covered every inch of the floor, which itself was covered in 5 inches of slippery, stinking filth. End quote.
No, absolutely not.
Following the closure of the prison, Newgate gained new life as a popular tourist location in the 19th and 20th centuries. By the 1870s, people interested in Connecticut's history would go on to refer to the prison as Old Newgate. At one point, it was used as a private residence, with its owners, the Veets family, providing candlelit tours to their visitors.
Cute.
A fire in 1904 would destroy a significant portion of the 4-story cell block, the ruins of which you can still see today. However, thanks to its popularity, The original guardhouse in the prison yard would go on to be converted into a dance hall in the 1920s and 30s.
Cute.
Several attractions would be brought to the site, such as animals, particularly a caged bear and its cub, and several
Interesting.
artifacts that had nothing to do with the history of the mine or prison were
Of
purchased
course.
by the owners, such as a number of antique cars and a tank from World War I.
Why not? Why not?
Why not? The state of Connecticut would purchase the site once more in 1968, at which point they cleaned it up, removed all the added features, and instead updated the property with a concrete staircase in the 1970s to provide a safer entrance and exit into the mine.
Nice.
The National Park Service designated Old Newgate Prison and Copper Mines as a National Historic Landmark in 1973.
Cool.
In 2009, Newgate was closed for renovations and wouldn't be reopened until 9 years later in 2018. It is now managed by the Department of Economic and Community Development.
Mhm.
And today you can visit the site and take part in either a guided tour or a self-guided tour of the prison and the mine. Informational signs are stationed at each of the prominent structures on the property to answer any questions you may have. If you would like more information or to take a virtual tour of the property, I highly recommend that you visit their official website, which we have linked in our show notes. And this year it will open up for in-person tours once more in May of 2025.
Nice.
And that's Old Newgate Prison.
Okay.
Didn't know we had an underground prison at the very start of our country.
Yeah. Like the whole thing was just really crazy.
Mm-hmm. I can't imagine.
No. And then like them trying to improve it and make it habitable space at some point.
Yeah.
It's like, you guys give up. Like, just stop, please.
Yeah.
Please stop.
Yeah, I watched a video of, people touring the mine, and
Mhm.
everybody was like stooped over in the video. So it's like the ceilings weren't that high in this. And I
Yeah.
can't imagine if you're like in the dark.
Trapped. 12
Yeah.
hours a day.
Yeah. No thanks.
Mm-mm.
If you love the show, the best way to support us is to leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, Good Pods, Castbox, Podcast Addict, and or Audible. Links to all of these are in our show notes, or if you're already listening on one of these platforms, you know what to do.
Oh, and while you're at it, shoot us a question you'd like to hear us answer on the pod. We'll give you a special shout out and address your burning questions all at the same time. The weirder, the better. Submit them via link in our show notes or shoot them to us in our DMs.
Hi, I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan. We are Mountain Murders, an Appalachian true crime podcast dropping weekly episodes every Sunday.
Our show offers well-researched cases with unique storytelling and southern flavor.
Stories so good you'll want to sop them up with a biscuit.
Ooh, I pull back the curtain on lesser-known and often obscure regional cases from Georgia to Maine, exploring the darkness that lurks deep in the heart of Appalachia.
And I react with profound statements.
You mean profoundly stupid statements?
Something like that.
We're not your stereotypical hillbillies.
But we do like moonshine.
It'll tickle your innards.
Join us every Wednesday for Mountain Murders Offbeat.
Offbeat is a mini episode covering a variety of topics from true crime to conspiracy theories, the paranormal, and Appalachian-centric subjects.
Find Mountain Murders anywhere you download podcasts. Hit subscribe today to catch up on our latest episodes or binge our catalog.
And this week's podcast plug is the Mountain Murders podcast. East Coast murders covered by Appalachian folks Heather and Dylan. Who knew mountains could be so deadly?
I did.
They're pretty scary. Are you ready to embark on a perilous journey through the treacherous peaks of true crime? Welcome to Mountain Murders True Crime, where chilling tales of mayhem and mystery await. Join intrepid hosts Heather and Dylan as they navigate the dark side of nature, exploring crimes that will make your hair stand on end. From mysterious disappearances to shocking homicides, their podcast will have you on the edge of your seat, clutching your hiking gear tightly. So grab your headphones, strap on your adventure boots, and get ready for a wild ride through the untamed world of Mountain Murders True Crime. They are part of the Darkcast network, and we will have a link to their show in the show notes.
Nice.
And we have a listener question from our friend Mariam from the Philippines.
Nice. Hi.
And she would like to know, who in history would you have liked to be friends with? It could be anyone you've mentioned in your podcast or anyone in the 1900s.
Again, I'm going to go real nerdy here, and I'm going to get me some time with Dr. Banting, one of the creators of modern day insulin, and be like, listen, you need to get yourself a lawyer. We need to lock this down somehow so we can keep this free or very, very cheap.
Yep.
And just work real hard, just stay with it until regulations are in place from the start. That's what I would do. What about you?
It would still be really awesome to hang out with Alice Roosevelt.
Mm-hmm.
She sounded like a super cool lady.
Just going on vacation with the Roosevelts. Going literally anywhere.
It would have been interesting to be on her Goodwill travel to the Orient.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be fun.
It's like the equivalent of an influencer brand trip.
Pretty much, yes. I think that'd be really fun to hang out with her.
Yeah, I agree. That'd be a really great use of that time.
Thank you, Mariam. If you have any questions you'd like to ask us, you can slide into our DMs or you can email us at yieldcrimepodcast@gmail.com. Want to be social with us? You can see pics from this week's episode, bonus content, and funny memes on X at YieldCrimePod or on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and YouTube at Ye Olde Crime Podcast.
Speaking of YouTube, we have a special playlist just for our Can You Crack the Cramp Word segments with our guest podcasters to see who can correctly guess the meaning of some obscure Victorian slang terms. If that's your thing, check it out.
So what's something good you'd like to share?
Something good. So, kind of speaking of Banting and Best, I really love my job. I love my job a whole lot, and we're working on some reports right now, and I am still buzzing I got a really good compliment from my boss saying that my contributions to this report might make it one of the most comprehensive reports that come out in history for the state. So
nice.
Yeah, just feeling good about my job and where I'm at, and I think I'm where I need to be. And it's been a while since I've had a compliment like that at my job. Or like, you're gonna help us make history. It's like, I'm sorry, what did you say to me? Yeah, just knowing that what we're doing is the right thing and just feels good. So that's my good thing. What about you?
In a similar vein, I am thankful for my new job. I'm only a couple weeks in at this point, and it's a lot. It's an industry that I have zero experience working in, so it's a lot of getting up to speed on the types of products and services that we offer, the type of software and marketing tools that they use, which I am not familiar with. But I do appreciate the fact that I am not the only new person on my team.
Nice. So you actually get to like learn with somebody?
Yep. So the whole marketing team is new, with the exception of the director. So it's myself and two other individuals. One is more like graphic focused, and the other one is the senior marketing specialist. So he'll be doing more of like the higher level analytics and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think it's good to know that I'm not the only one that's starting with fresh eyes.
Yeah.
That we're all kind of like learning and growing together. So
Mm-hmm.
makes it a little bit easier.
Nice.
All right. Shall we?
Let's do it.
We love to hear from you, and there's a couple of ways you can reach out to us. You can email us at yeoldecrimepodcast@gmail.com, where you can send us story ideas, share any spooky stories you may have, fun gifts, or even just to say hello.
You can also reach out to us via snail mail. Remember mail? Our mailing address is Ye Olde Crime Podcast, P.O. Box 341, Wyoming, Minnesota 55092. Fun fact, we like to send out thank you cards with fun stickers you can't get at our shop, so it's worth the cost of a stamp.
And on that note, as always, I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Madison.
And we'll see you next time with another tale
as old as crime.